All right, if we are live, and I believe we are, so welcome everybody to episode 3 of our All Pro Sports podcast here, live streamed on YouTube. And tonight we have one of our newest co hosts here for our All Pro Sports broadcast, Mack Baltes, who is a student of and a classmate of mine here at UNC Charlotte, as similar to my other two co hosts, and Billy McGee and Griff Barlow. But Mac, I would like to officially welcome you to the All Pro Sports podcast team, and I'm looking forward to talking some sports with you tonight.
For sure, yeah, I really appreciate it, and I'm very excited as well.
hmm So just kind of introducing Mac to on the team, as I've always done with my co-host. Mac is a Cincinnati Bengals fan, a Tampa Bay Lightning fan, a St. Louis Cardinals fan, and a Boston Celtics fan. And certainly, as we just mentioned about the Cincinnati Bengals, certainly a huge matchup this week in divisional weekend going against the Buffalo Bills coming up here. But first and foremost, though, going back to that wild card matchup between them and Baltimore, what a thrilling game that was, and certainly just a game changing play there by Sam Hubbard, making the fumble recovery on that incredible goal line stand by Cincinnati. I just kind of wanted to get your thoughts on what you saw from the Bengals against the Ravens in their wild card matchup last weekend.
Yeah, I mean they looked solid. It's always tough having to play a team not only 3 times in a season, but
Mhm.
2 weeks consecutively.
Mhm.
I felt like when it came to clock management, Baltimore really managed the game and how they were able to pick up first downs running the ball. But I mean the Sam Hubbard touchdown that you just mentioned, uh, it helped the Bengals relax. They didn't have to score again after that. And so, and as you mentioned, going up into Buffalo this weekend for a tough matchup, and Buffalo beat the Dolphins by 3 with the Dolphins' third string quarterback, and the
Mhm.
Bengals beat the Ravens by 7 with their second string quarterback. So both teams coming off of not lackluster performances, but definitely it's not what they were hoping for.
Mhm.
So it could go either way this Sunday.
Mhm. It'll be the third overall matchup between the Bills and the Bengals, I believe. In the postseason, Bengals won the first two matchups. I think the first was in 1981 when Ken Anderson outperformed um, Bills quarterback Joe Ferguson in the AFC divisional, and then both teams met in the 1988 AFC Championship game when Boomer Esiason took down Jim Kelly that year in '88. So certainly it will be a fun matchup between Burrow and Allen going for the right to play in the AFC Championship game, certainly. And we'll touch base on that a minute or so later. But kind of looking at some of the um, other big storylines from Wild Card Weekend, of course, I got to say this about my New York Giants and Daniel Jones topping the Minnesota Vikings. Just a really impressive performance by Daniel Jones, shattered the record books when I didn't even realize how great of a performance he had. I had to miss the game to work, but we recorded the game and I was able to catch most of the game. But the first quarterback in NFL history with over 300 passing yards, two passing touchdowns, and over 70 rushing yards in a game. And I think they were showing a stat on ESPN saying Steve Young and Lamar Jackson accomplished that feat themselves in their playoff matchups, but lost both times. But Daniel Jones, of course, provides himself into that elite class there. But kind of just like, throwing this to you there, how much of a chance do you think the Giants would have against the Eagles and their divisional matchup on Saturday?
Yeah, that's a great question, and as you being a Giants fan, I kind of hate to say this.
Right.
I did catch the end of that Giants Vikings game, and
Mhm.
and I as a sports fan, I like to be very unbiased, and I try to predict matchups.
Exactly.
And going into Wild Card Weekend, the Giants was the only upset that I had. I did not have the Chargers blowing such a huge lead and losing to
Mhm.
Jacksonville, but it did happen. But I did have the Giants winning that game against a very good Vikings team but a
Absolutely.
Vikings team that we all thought were actually worse than what their record suggested.
Mhm.
So yeah, Daniel Jones played great as you mentioned, and they did get the win. However, and I did just mention it just a second ago. It's always weird playing teams three times in one
It is.
season.
Mhm.
And the Eagles will face the Giants again for that third time this weekend, and I do like their chances. If you ask me, we're looking at four football games, and if you ask me, I would say two are going to be very good, and the other two might not be so great. And
Mm.
two of the games that I don't think will be so great will be that Philly Giants game as well as the Chiefs and Jaguars game,
True.
because I mean, with how many turnovers we saw the Jaguars have, not even in the game, just in the
Right.
first half.
Mhm.
I mean, it's hard to beat the Chiefs turning the ball over twice, let alone
Right.
five times. So we'll have to see. But when it comes to the two matchups that I think are the snoozers, as I just mentioned, I would say the Giants have a better chance at the Eagles than the Jaguars do the Chiefs.
Mhm. That's a fair assessment there, and I certainly agree with that. And kind of going on to that Kansas City and Jacksonville game, I'm certainly in agreement with you there. I mean, Jacksonville just cannot be as careless as they were against the Chargers. And just kind of briefly touching on recent news about this, I kind of mentioned that um, on our group me chat that I was going to go into a bit of a rant on Brandon Staley after blowing that 27 to nothing lead to Jacksonville. And just all I say to Chargers fans is this: I understand that you let your offensive coordinator Joe Lombardi go and Shane Day go just earlier this week, but to me, you fire the wrong people. Brandon Staley, to me, I think, has been such an aggressive head coach that has basically tossed down his entire philosophy of what he was. You're talking about a coach who started his collegiate career at the Division 3 level and then essentially jumped like four ranks to being the Chicago Bears linebackers coach for a few years, spends only one season with Sean McVay as a true defensive coordinator in the NFL in 2020, and then he's handed the Chargers job last year in 2021 after they had selected Justin Herbert. And I just think, he just seems so in over his head right now with the Chargers. And, certainly I'm giving tremendous kudos to Doug Peterson with, the tremendous second half adjustments, but that defense just relaxed so much in that second half. And I was just shaking my head seeing the highlights. I was like, Staley, what in the world are you doing giving Christian Kirk and Evan Ingram so much space to run wild there? I just think they, have really bought so much in the Staley over this season.
Yeah, I mean, and I'll first off just say, the Doug Peterson effect is proving real. We all thought so much of Urban Meyer, and then when he came to the NFL, there wasn't much to be said about Jacksonville. But Doug Peterson showed why he's a great coach, and if I remember correctly. Through the majority of the first time that the Chiefs and Jaguars matched up earlier this year, it was a close game.
It
Uh,
was.
but as far as Brandon Staley goes and the Chargers' performance, I definitely think they are monitoring, possibly bringing in a new coach.
Mhm.
And even last year, or before Staley was hired, I should say, I was surprised that they didn't consider another defensive coach who used to play for the Chargers, Ron
Sure.
Rivera.
Yeah.
Uh, but
Mm.
I think, especially the NFL coaching carousel right now certainly seems like there's a huge domino waiting to fall, and that domino is being Sean Payton.
Oh,
If the Chargers think they have any chance at Sean Payton, I think you'd see them let Staley go.
mhm.
But with Jim Harbaugh just agreeing to return back to Michigan, that's
Mhm.
another one of the top names in this, I guess, free agency, if you will, for coaches, even though technically Peyton's still with the Saints. Uh, but no Harbaugh. uh, If the Chargers can't get a hold of Harbaugh or Peyton, then within you're wondering, should I stay with Staley? This is a young coach. This is a young team.
Mhm.
And even if they did win the game, were they gonna go all the way? Who knows? If you ask me, I think they would have given the Chiefs a way better game than
Agree.
Jacksonville, but that's yet to be seen.
Mhm.
And Staley has had some success against or I mean, not Jacksonville, against Kansas City in his
Consistent.
career. So we'll have to see how it goes. When it comes to the unfolding of how that game ended, uh, it's really just poor offense, if you ask me. And you could say, oh, well, they gave up so many points in the second half. Well,
Mhm.
the only points that they scored were because of all the defensive turnovers that the defense forced. We're talking about 4 interceptions, and we're also talking about, I believe it was on a punt return that they had a recovery, which
Yeah.
gave them great field position. So,
Mhm.
yeah, a lot of people are pointing to the second half defense, but if the defense gives you 5 possessions and at least 20 points, and there was a missed field goal by the Chargers kicker there, uh, but what more can you ask of them?
Mhm. Yeah, I'm certainly in agreement there. I mean, that was a huge missed field goal midway through the fourth quarter. It just kind of seemed Jacksonville just easily took that momentum for the rest of the game. And I gave a ton of credit to Peterson with that really creative fourth down call that put him in field goal range, just giving ETN that chance to just do that sweep and just use his pure speed just down the sidelines to set up for the game winning field goal. But certainly you and I are in complete agreement, knowing that the Chargers and Chiefs probably would have been a better divisional round game than what Jacksonville is going to be. Jacksonville's not quite ready yet, I think, to um, shape up with the rest of the title contenders there. But I was trying to think of the one divisional game that we haven't touched. All right, the 49ers and Cowboys being the last one there. I have certainly been on the Brock Purdy bandwagon ever since he had a strong coming out several weeks ago. I mean, being Mr. Irrelevant, the last pick in the draft. And, I had to even look up his stats at Iowa State when he was kind of balling and doing what he did. He didn't really have surprising numbers, but certainly his completion percentage in Iowa State, where I think in his last year was like hovering around 70% in his last year with the Cyclones. So, I mean, just like seeing him just being blessed with so many weapons with McCaffrey, Kittle, Samuel, and a strong defense to lay back on. I mean, I just said this to someone the other day. He's got to be the luckiest rookie quarterback I've ever seen in my years of pro football, just to be running the Shanahan system and just being blessed with these guys. And of course, going against the Dallas Cowboys who they had last year in the wild card round. What did you take from their wild card weekend games, and how do you see that divisional game being um, set up for Sunday?
Yeah, I kept track of the Seahawks 49ers game, although I didn't watch it. And I did catch some of the Buccaneers Cowboys game. And the Seahawks 49ers game was a close one
Hmm.
until it wasn't. And
Right.
and that's sometimes how it ends up being. As far
Hmm.
as Brock Purdy goes and his amazing play, I mean, as of right now, I can only say that he's a product of the system.
Hmm.
However, he hasn't played a bad game yet, and not even a mediocre game. And I've even read reports that have said that even if Jimmy Garoppolo can return, he will
Hmm.
return as the backup. Uh, but I would say that, this is a Dallas team that looks scary. They
Hmm.
beat the Buccaneers by a lot, but they were supposed to beat them by quite a few.
Hmm.
They added a midseason weapon in T.Y. Hilton, who was
Right.
getting involved against the Buccaneers. They have a great duo of running backs, and the defense can be really solid at times. If you
Yeah.
ask me, I think this is more so than a skill and talent matchup. This is going to come down to a coaching matchup, and
Agree. Hmm.
when it comes to two coaches and Shanahan and McCarthy, you give the advantage to Shanahan and all the weapons that he has. But I think the biggest storyline and perhaps the biggest test of the game will be that, star-studded 49ers offense
Mhm,
against a Dallas defense, which you'd rather see the Dallas offense on the field than you would the defense. But the
mhm,
defense isn't awful, but it's
mhm,
not. You wouldn't say it's a defense that wins you Super Bowls either.
mhm. Certainly I'm interested to see, how Dallas essentially, we were mentioning this last night in our group chat with Brett Mayer just missing all those extra points before he kind of finally righted himself. I think I heard today they're still retaining Mayer as their kicker, but every point's going to matter for um, Dallas next week. So, I mean, if Mayer comes in a big situation, if that turns out to be a low scoring game or it comes down to a one possession game, any momentum can be seized by whoever gets there. But it was nice to see um, Prescott and those guys kind of finally delivering home after, sort of like all the hoopla around Brady with his supposed last game, whoever, what happens with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers there. But certainly a very exciting wild card um, weekend nonetheless. And I'm really looking forward to seeing who comes out of divisional weekend for the AFC and NFC championship teams. But what we're going to
For
do actually here. Oh, no, go ahead. Go ahead.
For sure, but just one last comment on Mayer. I did read today that although the Cowboys plan to stick with him, they have brought another kicker onto the roster. So it might be a one and done situation. If he misses one, they pull him right away.
Mm.
I'm not positive.
Sure. Do you know who it was who they brought on, or?
I believe, and I think I recall his first name being Tristan, but Tristan Vizcaino,
Oh,
I
yeah.
believe was the
Mhm.
kicker that they added today.
Yeah, I was trying to see it and look it up. I'll look it up later. I won't have to, you know, kind of waste so much time here. But what we're actually going to do though here is kind of what I have done with the last couple of broadcasts here is I was going to see about possibly switching roles here a little bit, probably sticking either with the NFL or with college football. I was going to kind of give you the floor and just either ask me questions about what you've seen recently in the NFL or in college football that you kind of just wanted to turn the tables and ask me a couple of questions.
Sure, yeah. I guess my first question to you would be if you're not a fan of any team in the college football playoff, but just a football fan or a college football fan in general, how do you react to such two close semifinal games, but then
Mhm,
the final being an absolute wash, and it was the
mm,
lowest viewed college football final since they implemented the college football playoff.
wow. Mm. Yeah, I mean, certainly I was on the TCU bandwagon so much this year, and it was an absolute shame that TCU just, like as you said, that game was just an absolute blowout. I mean, I tried to see how TCU would try to attack Georgia, but they just underestimated their speed so much. All the bubble screens they try to do, and all just like the short game I just said, you just cannot run that against Georgia. And they just sucked up almost every offensive play that TCU had going for them. And one of my um, people that I've had on my podcast, being a huge Georgia Bulldogs fan that he is, he texted me that he was at the Georgia National Championship parade. As much as I want to give kudos to Georgia going back to back and certainly being the new stabilizing force in the SEC, I mean, certainly it was a big disappointment to see TCU just kind of, I wouldn't say they, you know, didn't let the limelight just kind of sink in, but just knowing that they haven't played as good of an SEC team as Georgia has. I mean, everybody felt Georgia was the complete runaway almost from the get go once the season began last year, but TCU just ran into an absolute roadblock, and it just seemed like at halftime they just had no chance, to catch up with them for the rest of the game.
Would you say that Michigan would have provided a better game?
Hmm. I
And
certainly agree. And, I mean, as much as JJ McCarthy struggled in that game against TCU, I mean, certainly I'm not casting any dispersions on Sonny Dykes, knowing that it was his first year there at TCU, but knowing that Harbaugh was an experienced coach there in Michigan and knowing that he had been with those guys, I'm certainly thinking that he would have easily had a better game plan. I'm certainly thinking Georgia probably still would have come out on top as the result, but certainly I think Michigan probably wouldn't have lost by more than, I don't know, 3 or 4 possessions, maybe, or maybe they could have made it close, but I just don't think they could have stopped Georgia's juggernaut offense and defense the way they looked in the national championship.
Yeah, definitely. And then one more question about college football before I move on to, maybe our playoff matchups this weekend.
Mhm.
Uh, do you think, and maybe this is a question that, for somebody viewing who doesn't follow sports as much as we do, but is it is it fathomable that TCU really played that poorly? Is it fathomable that in a college championship game you could lose by
Mhm.
58 points?
Mhm.
And then kind of tying this into the following question is, was this season really great for college football? And where does the outlook of college football go from here?
This is really kind of a question I've sliced over the last few weekends. Certainly, I've been following the transfer portal and some of the big news out of the NIL. I just saw just a few minutes ago that ESPN reported about that Florida quarterback who had that $13 million NIL deal being scrapped down, and certainly bidders are opening up for him. But as far as seeing Mark Emmert being let go, and they recently said that Charlie Baker, who is the governor of Massachusetts currently, he's going to slide in as the new NCAA commissioner. I just think this college football season, that the thing I have always said about this season is the one thing that I do like about the transfer portal is just seeing how college kids themselves, they're just kind of using that to basically rewrite their careers. We saw how Bo Nix looked this year transferring from Auburn to Oregon. I saw a huge revelation in Michael Penix. I saw a little bit of him in Indiana, but I didn't think he was as good as what I saw him in Washington. I'm really excited to see him next year. But as far as like the NIL and just kind of like these college programs or athletic directors and coaches just kind of, I wouldn't say like they're weaponizing the NIL to just kind of like get big recruiting classes or try and test each other. But certainly I just think, coaches and programs aren't taking this the same way as the students are. I just think that, the students, they're just trying to find a space that they know that can fit for them, as well as just possibly rewrite their careers if they're heading to the NFL. But I certainly think as far as like the coaches and programs and ADs are attacking this right now, I just think it's like two totally um opposite directions that's going in. I'm just hoping that when Charlie Baker takes over as commissioner, I wouldn't say like, try and structure the NIL a little bit better, but possibly just kind of say to the, college teams, just saying, hey, there's a new sheriff in town and I'm not going to be run over as the way that Mark Emmert was, just being dragging, kicking, and screaming to the Supreme Court and then just losing that case up in front of me. Basically his power was just dispelled basically after that result came down a few years ago.
Definitely. And I do think, we're in a little bit of dangerous territory with the NIL only
Mhm,
based on region alone. You're talking about something that we've never considered with college sports before, and that is going to a big market school. You
mhm,
talk about it in the NHL, the NBA, the MLB, and the NFL, is people wanting to play for a big market team. Well,
mhm,
now you have, students considering choosing a big market school so that
mhm.
they can acquire these NIL deals. But that, but you bring up a great point. But to move on to the NFL, my next question for you would be, apart from quarterbacks, because that's all we talk about in the postseason, who are your biggest impact players for each team, for all 8 teams going into this weekend's matchups?
Certainly, I'll go ahead and just start with my Giants here. First, certainly, I just think, if Daniel Jones certainly has a repeat performance against Philadelphia, that's exactly what I think he has to do. And Barkley, just both of them have just had a nice chemistry with each other. Those two would be my immediate impact players on offense for them. My 2 on the defense, though, certainly Dexter Lawrence is a huge one for me with a huge Pro Bowl season that he had, um, this year, and then possibly the one I'm thinking in their secondary unit, not so much Xavier McKinney. I know that he's kind of returned from injury, but I've really liked how Julian Love has played for the Giants secondary this year, kind of really stepping up, being a nice leader along with him and McKinney. And certainly I'm just real excited to see how they tackle free agency in the draft, but that'll be a conversation for another day. But certainly those would be my 4 impact players for the Giants. Possibly for your Bengals, I would easily pick Joe Burrow and possibly, it's so hard to just kind of figure, which is the receiver that you go to. You have Higgins, you have Boyd, and you have Jamar Chase, just that incredible threesome that Cincinnati has. Maybe I would pick Higgins maybe for that one because I think all the attention would probably just be with Jamar Chase, but seeing those guys underneath, and I even know that he got Hayden Hurst involved a little bit in that playoff game against Baltimore. I just think that's just a fantastic passing attack that Cincinnati has. And then as far as um, the defense goes for Cincinnati, all around, I mean, that defensive team that you guys have for Cincinnati, Lou, I can't, I don't know how to pronounce his last name. It's like Anuramo or something like that. I don't know how to pronounce it, but just he has molded that defense tremendously. I love that they got that Trey Hendrickson from the Saints last year. He has followed up another great season this year, and that's a very underwhelming secondary unit you guys have with um, Jesse Bates and everybody else back there. I'm just thinking that I just think Cincinnati's the more well balanced team than Buffalo is right now. But I don't want to constantly rant about my impact players. I was kind of seeing, if you had your impact players for the 2 other teams, and then we'll switch, I guess, for the last 2, but just kind of get your thoughts.
For sure, and yeah, just before I go into some impact players, just a little bit
Mhm,
on the Bengals. I think the Bengals can secure a win this weekend if the offensive line holds up, and we saw
mhm,
them have 3 injuries they had to deal with
mhm.
in replacing in the Baltimore game. And yeah, you mentioned T. Higgins being a possible weapon, especially with all the attention on Chase, but also look for Tyler Boyd as well.
Right.
And we saw him catch the only touchdown in the Bills Bengals game earlier this season before it was postponed. But also,
Mhm.
you mentioned Hayden Hurst. Let's not forget about him. And we definitely saw the increase in role that CJ Uzama had
Yeah.
last postseason compared to his role in
Mhm,
the regular season. So
mhm,
perhaps, more usage of the tight ends could be on the cards for the Bengals.
mhm.
But definitely, you can never count out Samaje Perine or Joe Mixon. And with
Mhm,
Joe Mixon, I like to say that he's always mixing it up. But
mhm,
yeah, you can't count out the Bengals offense, but you
mhm.
can possibly count out the Bengals offensive line. So that'll be the biggest story. But if
Yeah,
you ask me, I'd say Joe Burrow has improved the most in his
agree.
elusiveness.
Mhm,
We saw him take a lot of sacks his rookie year, and none
mhm.
of, I'm not here to say that that was Joe Burrow's fault or his ACL tear was completely on him. It
Right.
definitely wasn't. The Bengals made a conscious decision to go Jamar Chase in the first round instead of
Mhm.
Penei Sewell, and at the time, as a fan, I didn't like the pick, but it
I
turned out to
yeah.
but it turned out to be great. You can't, with the success Chase and Burrow have had, you can't
Mhm.
knock the pick.
No.
Last off season, what they prioritized what they needed to with offensive line. We're talking about Alex Kappa, we're talking about Lyle Collins, but Lyle Collins didn't play in
No.
last week's matchup. So uh, I think the biggest problem for the Bengals could be that offensive line. And for the Buffalo Bills, as I said, mentioning uh, you know biggest playoff contributors. We always mention quarterbacks, so Josh Allen is a no-brainer. But
Yeah.
Stephon Diggs, you have to talk about, and you
Right.
also have to talk about the deep threat of Gabe Davis, because let's not forget, in addition to some offensive line injuries. Uh, Chidobe Awuzie, I believe is how you pronounce it, was also out as a
Mhm.
corner in last week's game against Baltimore. And Eli Apple has a tendency of getting scored on,
He
and
does.
the
Yeah.
only deep touchdown pass that the Ravens had all night was with Eli Apple in coverage, kind of cheating, not cheating, but looking for an interception there, and then ended up getting beat over the top.
Mhm.
Uh, so I believe it will be one of the most entertaining matchups of the season, uh,
Mhm.
and we'll have to see how it goes.
Mhm. I'm certainly looking forward to seeing, almost all the matchups. I think I might miss the first Saturday game. I, have a work conflict with that issue, but certainly, I'll probably catch the Giants game and probably the first game on um Sunday, but certainly, I'll be recording all the games and probably just watching them after I get home. But certainly, just the matchups are tremendous right now, and I'm certainly hoping that if Cincinnati wins, because I'm to be honest, I'm really picking Cincinnati right now. If you want to just make your picks for the AFC Championship, I'm picking Cincinnati over Buffalo. Sammy Eli and everybody who's Bills fans, I apologize, but I just like Cincinnati's chances in that game, and I expect a rematch of the AFC Championship as it was last year, and probably for my NFC Championship one, probably going to pick the 49ers and Giants. I think for my one, I'm might call me a homer being a Giants fan, but I kind of just really like the Giants' chances against Philly. Just kind of seeing just Hurts still kind of battling that injury, but I think that will be my AFC championship and NFC championship picks there. Kansas City against Cincinnati, and the Giants will take on the 49ers.
Yeah, those are definitely some interesting picks. I can't say that I would necessarily agree, but also, one game that I haven't even considered picking yet is that 49ers Cowboys game. That's how close I think it's going to be. I still haven't made up my mind. And yeah, you mentioned knowing a lot of Bills fans, and as I've mentioned to you before, I have a lot of family in Buffalo. I know they're amped up for the matchup this weekend. But let's not forget, you and I just talked about Bengals injuries. The
True.
Bills have had a horrible year all year with injuries, and honestly, very unlucky. Uh, you know, to, and that's without even mentioning Damar Hamlin, who suffered
Mhm.
that terrible injury that we saw earlier in the season. But
Yeah.
uh, yeah, if you're picking the Giants, I'm definitely picking the Bengals. So I'll have the Bengals over the Bills. Partially because I think we can take them down, and partially because I'd like to see it. In
Mhm.
addition to that, as much as I would like for Trevor Lawrence and Doug Peterson to take down the Chiefs, I don't see it happening. I do think the Chiefs are going to run into a little bit more trouble in the postseason this year without having that huge weapon that Tyreek Hill is. You can kind of cover that up in the regular season without him, especially with how great Kelsey's been. But I
Uh-huh.
mean, the thing is with Travis Kelsey is it's coming, but you still can't stop it. But
Yeah.
I think in the playoffs, teams are going to be a little bit more dialed in on defense with the Mahomes Kelsey duo.
Yeah.
However, if the Chiefs don't have to play a tough game until the AFC Championship, give them the leg up for sure over whoever they face, whether that's Cincinnati or Buffalo.
Mhm.
Because, Cincinnati and Buffalo having to play each other, then playing the Chiefs, and then playing the Super Bowl, if you ask me, that's almost like playing 3 Super Bowls.
It's a tall task, nonetheless. I mean, what's amazed me so much about seeing how Patrick Mahomes and Andy Reid and the Chiefs have done, I just, it amazes myself that, I just kind of seem to like so overlook Kansas City this year. I like to always just kind of touch base to see like how every team is doing, but Kansas City just kind of just seems like another quiet year for them. 14-3, just nothing too great other than you could say Mahomes has another 5,000-yard season, and he's probably the front runner for the MVP right now, seeing Kelsey and Schuster and even that Isaiah Pacheco on their offense right now. That's the thing that I've been saying to Kansas City for so many years, going back to when they had Alex Smith or even when they I know they briefly had Jamal Charles for a few years before injuries kind of took him down. But if you just give Patrick Mahomes a running game, that offense is just unstoppable to me. I mean, just if you just get him just 1,000 yard back and just seeing just how he's just makes everything just look so easy. It's incredible just seeing how Kansas City has dominated that West over the last several years, but just seeing how easy they look, it's incredible.
For sure, and let's not forget about Jerick McKinnon,
Mhm.
who's shown, amazing performance as a pass catcher out of the backfield.
Mhm.
Part of me, this is the Bengals fan speaking and me,
Mhm.
but who owns the deed to Arrowhead Stadium?
There you
Joe
go.
Burrow does.
That's right.
With the win against the Chiefs this season and
Mhm.
2 wins against the Chiefs last season, that
Right.
coming in the regular season and in the playoffs, as we saw.
Mhm.
Uh, have the Bengals looked good against the Chiefs? Yes, but again, I said it before and I'll say it one again. When you're facing a team 3 times in a season, and they're only facing them for the second time, but it's hard to consistently keep beating opponents in the NFL. It just is. There's so many adjustments that can be made. But
Mhm.
enough about the Bengals. I've talked about them enough. As far as that Giants Eagles matchup goes, I still like the Eagles, even though they're a little bit banged up. I like the defense a little bit better.
Too.
And
Mhm.
when you're talking about, great receivers who can make great plays, I'm talking about AJ Brown. I'm definitely not talking about Darius Slayton or
No.
really anybody on that
Right.
Giants receiving core. So for those reasons, I like the Eagles, even though, and I would say possibly the only game in which the Giants are better is that running game, but I
Yeah.
still like the Eagles to win that matchup.
Mhm.
And as far as, like I said before, as far as that 49ers Cowboys game goes, I think you could go either way. Uh, but let me just be put on the record to say this.
Gotcha.
Brock Purdy, as we said, hasn't had a bad game. The
That's
chances
right.
of him having a bad game sooner or later, I would say
That's right.
are higher than they are low.
Mhm.
You want to look to postseason experience, look to the Cowboys. So if I
Mhm.
had to say, you know what, I'll go with the Cowboys against a rookie quarterback, but never count Shanahan out, never
No.
count the weapons of the 49ers out or their defense. So I'm reluctantly choosing Dallas this weekend because you put me on the spot with that one for sure.
Yeah. Sorry about that. Just kinda was trying to figure just, talking so much on the NFL, and I just kinda thought as well, since we probably won't meet again this week, I just kinda thought, let's go ahead and just see if we can, um, make the picks quick, but you were kinda
For
mentioning.
sure. And
Oh,
one more thing, just so the viewers at home know, me talking about the Chiefs possibly playing the Bengals does mean I'm completely disregarding the Jaguars as an opponent. And even though I haven't said it, I am picking the Chiefs to win that game as well.
gotcha. Mhm. Yeah, I was the same too. I just think that game's gonna be a wash if, Lawrence just kinda looks as bad as he did in the, um, first half of that,
Right.
Chargers game
It,
here, but Um, what I was gonna say is, just kind of before we kind of just wrap this up a little bit in a little bit, one of the things I kind of reached out to you about with regards to some of your favorite teams. I know we talked a lot about the Cincinnati Bengals, but kind of going to your other teams, the Celtics, Cardinals, and the Tampa Bay Lightning. One of the things I kind of asked you is like, if you wanted to make a list or kind of say some of your favorite players from some of those teams, I'll let you take the floor for a minute if you wanted to say something about that.
for sure, yeah, definitely happy to do that. And first, I'll probably explain because you just had the question to me before we started is, how do you get all these teams? And honestly, my parents never really had an affiliation growing up.
Mhm.
And I just chose, I mean, I chose the Celtics because it was the first basketball game I ever viewed. I
Mhm.
chose teams like the Cardinals and the Bengals based off their logo
Mhm.
as at a very young age, and I've just stuck with them ever since, especially not having a baseball team in Charlotte growing up. But yeah, definitely I'm happy to give you maybe a little bit of a list. And you told me to maybe stick to 5 or 10, but
Yeah,
there's a lot of players I like, so I'll definitely
sure.
go
Yeah.
quick, but we'll start
You're
with
fine.
the St. Louis Cardinals. And as a young fan growing up, I remember watching that 2011 World Series against Texas. So,
Mhm.
just
Yep.
about anybody on that roster, I'm definitely a huge fan of. But
Mhm.
Adam Wainwright, Yadier Molina, Albert Pujols, David Freese with his huge hit in Game Six,
Incredible.
Matt Holliday, and the
Mm.
golden one, Paul Goldschmidt. You can't go
Yeah.
without saying his name. Almost had
Mhm.
a triple crown season last year, but did take
Incredible.
home the National League MVP. And
Mhm.
if you call Goldschmidt the golden one, be sure to call Arenado the platinum one. With
Yeah.
his great defense, he has not, uh, or not has not. He's won a Gold Glove every single season that he's played in the MLB.
It's insane how great he is. I
Definitely,
just
and go ahead.
just one quick thing I just kinda wanted to comment on. Certainly being a, New York Mets fan as I have been, certainly your Cardinals have absolutely just shredded my Mets for so many years. I still remember the 2006 NLCS when I was young when they, beat them in game 7 when they won that game and then defeated the Detroit Tigers in the World Series that year in 2006, and certainly, as you mentioned about freezing those guys in 2011, just an incredible game 6 performance by Freeze and just making it there in game 7. But, certainly, just, as much as I probably hate, to say this as a Mets fan, probably just the one team that I would say I would respect, out of probably the teams like in the NL East or the NL Central or um, the NL West. I just kind of think like the Mets and Cardinals, like for so many years, I could just remember back in the 80s, even when they competed against them, they just kind of seem like polar opposites at times, or sometimes you could just see them and they say, and you kind of almost see like the similarities. It's like you can either say they're opposites or similar to each other, but just it just kind of seems like a strange rivalry those two have had with each other, and I would love to see them in the same division again. But certainly as it matches up, certainly that's not going to be the case. But just every time they meet each other in a series, it's just always a grinder series that you could just never figure, who's the better team than the other one. Even though the Cardinals have certainly held a significant advantage because the Mets just haven't been in the postseason as much as St. Louis has had.
For sure, yeah, and that's why they call it the Cardinal way, similar to
Yeah.
the San Antonio Spurs that get that type of respect or used to at least in the NBA. And they've even called the Celtics recently the Spurs of the East with how quick that rebuild came around with Jason Tatum and Jalen Brown. But yeah, definitely definitely I would not want to see the Mets and the Cardinals in the same division anymore, especially with all the acquisitions they made. But today
True.
they did sign former Cardinal Tommy Pham to a 1-year deal.
I did not
But
see that.
as far as the Cardinals go, I'm as a Cardinals fan, I'm definitely happy to stick in the Central because I remember, around 2014 through 2016, you had some of the best records in the MLB coming out
Correct.
of the Central Division, and now that it's uh, now that it's not so good, I'm happy to exploit that for sure to the Cardinals' advantage because I can't imagine having to play teams like Philly and Atlanta,
Yeah,
or if you're in the NL West, having to play the Padres, Dodgers, Giants. You
exactly.
know, those are all some great teams. But to move on to the Celtics a little bit and some of my favorite players, I said I couldn't go without mentioning the 2011 championship for the Cardinals. I can't go without mentioning the 2008 championship for the
Yeah.
Celtics.
Mhm.
Kevin Garnett was my
Wow.
first favorite player in the NBA. Paul Pierce, Ray Allen, Rajon Rondo. Any Celtics fan will tell you a lot about Larry Bird, Kevin McHale, Robert Parrish, John Havlicek, but
Yeah,
also even during some of our rougher years, let's not forget the impact Isaiah Thomas had, Avery Bradley.
yeah.
And then when it
Mhm,
comes to the current Celtics, I'm always usually biased towards a, a longest tenured member. So Marcus Smart, he does
mhm.
the dirty work. He is a
Yeah.
flopper. Al Horford does a lot of the dirty work, but you can't go
Mhm,
without mentioning Jason Tatum. And I
mhm.
was in Charlotte just on Monday when he scored 51 points. And even though I was up in the rafters, it was electric. You had Celtics fans chanting MVP, and there were so many of them that you could hear it. So that was certainly super cool to see Jason Tatum go for 51, and we've seen it a lot this season. We've seen players with crazy stat lines. We saw
Mhm.
Donovan Mitchell go for 71.
Yeah.
We saw Luka go for a 60-point triple double.
Mhm.
We saw Jokic go for 30-point triple doubles,
Yeah.
40-point triple doubles, all these crazy stat lines. And I
Incredible.
believe even Damian Lillard and Nikola Jokic faced off
Mhm.
last night, and both had a great game.
Mm.
But to move on from the Celtics, definitely we'll talk about some of my favorites from the Bengals, and I've talked about the Bengals a lot already. But my first favorite NFL player when I started watching growing up as a Bengals fan, AJ Green. And,
Mm.
we talked about Georgia winning that championship. He's a
Yeah.
former Bulldog. Can't
Mhm.
forget about AJ Green, Dre Kirkpatrick, a great
Mhm.
corner for the Bengals for a little while. We have Geno Atkins, Tyler
Mhm.
Eifert, the best Bengals tight end, I would say,
Oh,
in
yeah.
recent history, but always
Mhm.
struggled with injuries for sure.
Oh, wow.
Uh,
Yeah.
you can't go without saying the Iron Man Andrew Whitworth, and then the current Bengals, you got Joe Burrow, Joe Mixon, T. Higgins, Jamar Chase. You can't go wrong there at all.
Mhm. Certainly I just have admired, certainly, as I kind of was mentioning to you before, knowing how big the New York Knicks and Boston Celtics were. I remember kind of like a really funny thing. I certainly don't have the same things as this, but certainly for a lot of Knicks fans, I could see kind of like what they mean when they kind of said, like, kind of like the players like they despise, like Reggie Miller. And of course, everybody, one of them kind of just had Larry Bird as one of their lists. As much as those 2 teams have been polar opposites, I remember when, it was earlier last year when, the great, Bill Russell passed away for, the Boston Celtics, but just seeing how legendary his career was there and, seeing, the tremendous effort of Red Auerbach, as you were saying about John Havlicek and Bob Cousy and those guys that he played with in the '50s and the '60s, what I just gotta commend Boston for is the one thing that I remember them saying is that the Celtics were, um, they compiled like the first African American roster in the early 1960s, but they said the Boston Red Sox were the last Major League Baseball team to acquire an African American on their roster. And, certainly I just think, for Boston from Auerbach to what Danny Ainge did for that organization for so many years and their current path that they are on right now. The thing I just want to say to James Dolan and probably just his father, Chuck Dolan, when are we going to see the Knicks and Celtics finally go back at it as what it was in the '80s and the '90s? Ewing and Bird, or just seeing how Celtics kind of played in the early '90s as well when Bird was still there. It's just when are we going to get back to those glory days? That's the question I just have for James Dolan and those guys. Just stop interfering and let's go.
Definitely, yeah, that's a great question, and perhaps, we could spend a whole episode talking about
Mhm,
the Knicks and their misfortune recently, but I'm glad you mentioned Bill Russell, an
mhm.
amazing ambassador for the game.
Absolutely. Mhm,
Unfortunate to see him pass away, but, the Celtics have done a good thing to honor him, having
mhm,
number 6 in the paint on their home floor, but also, you know,
mhm.
you have to commend the NBA for every single team wearing 6 on their jersey for at least this season, and I think it's a great gesture by them because Bill
Absolutely.
Russell meant so much not only to the Celtics, but to NBA basketball.
Yeah. Well, I was gonna tell you one quick story before, we head to, talking about some of your favorite players on the Lightning. One of the really cool stories that I, remember reading about Russell when he was first drafted, I think the St. Louis Hawks drafted him in 1956 or '57, I'm not sure which year it was, but I remember he orchestrated a trade out of St. Louis because I think, he just couldn't handle, um, I guess, like, as certainly as it was back in the civil rights movement with the race riots and the race issues and everything. I think he orchestrated a trade out of St. Louis just because he said he didn't even want to play there. So I think Boston sent one of their Hall of Famers they had to St. Louis in order to acquire him. I can't remember the guy's name, but I'll certainly reach out to you um, with the name. But I just kind of have said this, just seeing, the stories and essentially what he had to go through in Boston, especially since he was probably the one African American player that they had at that point, but certainly the fans didn't respect him in Boston, seeing just all the nasty things that happened to him, but still just being able to be, as you said, a great ambassador and a great human being, and basically took over for Red Auerbach after Auerbach decided to leave. Spent a few years as their player coach, still winning the NBA championships as they did during the 1960s.
Yeah, I mean, I guess words can't really describe Bill Russell's impact for sure. An
Mhm,
amazing impact and an amazing person, despite all of his
mhm,
success on the court, being the
abs-
most, not necessarily the most decorated NBA player in history, but certainly the the most championships, as we all know, by a
right.
wide margin.
11
Uh,
and
but
12
but
years. Mm,
but to move on to the
mhm,
Lightning,
sure.
yeah, some players of mine, I would say out of all the major sports, hockey is definitely the one that I've gotten that I got into the
Mhm,
latest. But choosing the Lightning at a somewhat young age,
mhm,
I don't really follow hockey for a while, but uh, Andre
yeah,
Vasilevsky, back when I would play hockey, and I don't have a ton of experience with it. I would always play goalie, so
mm,
I respect a great goalie, and he's
sure.
definitely been that.
Mhm,
Steven Stamkos, the captain, you can't go
yeah,
without mentioning him. Nikita
mhm,
Kucherov, Victor Hedman, and definitely Mikhail Sergachev getting things done on the defensive end. And then lastly, I know you don't talk about soccer too much on the channel,
mm,
but I thought that I would definitely talk about my favorite Liverpool players as I
sure.
do try and
Yeah.
support Liverpool. I would say Steven Gerrard, basically an older player, but definitely a Liverpool legend and an England legend who's now actually managing Aston Villa, another
Mm,
team in England. But Virgil van Dijk, a defensive stopper, a great defender for Liverpool now. Philippe Coutinho has scored some amazing goals for Liverpool over the years, and of course, you
mm,
can't go without saying Mohamed Salah or perhaps Sadio Mane, who recently just left Liverpool
mm,
after a very successful stint there.
mm.
But I also just wanted to say thank you for welcoming me, and I've been happy to discuss sports with you, but also discuss my favorite teams and a little bit about me to those at home watching.
Sure, absolutely. And kind of going back on the um, Lightning, I kind of still kind of haven't forgiven Ryan McDonough and Ryan Callahan when you guys acquired them a couple of years ago. They've been really solid contributors for you guys over the last couple of years, and I got to give incredible credit to their head coach, even though I think both of us kind of knew when Tampa Bay played the Rangers last year in the Eastern Conference Finals, as great of a series that was, but certainly I just had a sinking feeling no one could have beaten. Oh shoot, who was the team that unfortunately the Lightning lost to?
Colorado, the Avalanche.
That's it. Yeah, they just had an insanely talented team. Even though it went 6 games, I mean, it went 6 games for you guys. I thought that was going to be over in five. I didn't think Tampa Bay could have matched up against them, but they played 6 games against them.
De- Definitely, and I would say with the Lightning success, you have to give a whole lot of credit to how many players they've been able to retain. We
Mhm,
just talked about the Avalanche right after winning the championship. They lost Nazem Kadri, but when talking about the Lightning, although they just lost Andre Palat,
mhm,
you're talking about keeping Stamkos, you're talking about keeping Kucherov, you're talking about keeping Vasilevsky all together, and that's part of the reason why they've kind of run, a little bit of a mini dynasty,
mhm,
you could say, in the NHL, and it's all because they've been able to keep players, and in addition to that, they've made some good trades, and by good trades, I'm mostly talking about Brandon Hagel, who they grabbed last year from Chicago.
mhm. It's certainly going to be interesting. I haven't really talked a whole lot of hockey on this channel myself, but of course, me being a Rangers fan, as I mentioned when we both played against each other. But with any hockey news or NBA news, I'm certainly just kind of just getting into talking about some of the other leagues myself. I mean, as much as I pride myself on being knowledgeable about the NFL and college football, certainly, but certainly I'm just so open to talking about um, other sports. Even like as you were mentioning as well, one of my other co-hosts, Billy McGee, he's a huge European soccer fan as well. So if I have him on and you on, hopefully if I can kind of catch up on my soccer knowledge in the Euro leagues, that could be a fun conversation at some point as well.
For sure, yeah, definitely looking forward to it.
Mhm,
Coming right off the World Cup, getting back into some
mhm,
European club soccer, so definitely looking forward to that conversation.
mhm. So, probably just like the last item of business, I was just kind of thinking before um, we headed out, but just kind of just seeing um, any of the other big storylines in the NBA or Major League Baseball or college football that we haven't really touched on. If there was anything you kind of just wanted to bring up before we close it out, because we're about, I think, 4 minutes away from just 1 hour here on our broadcast.
Sure, yeah. I mean, the NBA with how that's going now, what's not to like? I mentioned it a second ago with so many players producing so many crazy stat lines, but really, when you look at the conferences, you're looking at a lot of good teams in each conference.
Mhm,
In the Eastern Conference, you're talking the Celtics, you're talking the Bucks, you're talking about the Cavs, who made a great trade for Donovan Mitchell. That's worked out great so far. You're talking about the Sixers, and let's not forget the Nets, who came off an underwhelming little stint with Kyrie, James Harden, and Kevin Durant. Uh, Although Kevin Durant just recently went down with an injury, they
mhm.
looked great when he was healthy. And Ben Simmons, kind of not really
Yeah,
kinda
just
coming into his own. So,
yeah.
I mean, we'll see what happens in that regard. And as far as the Western Conference goes, you're talking about 2 great 2 teams that have exceeded all expectations, that
Wow.
the that being the Kings and the Jazz, but also nobody expected the Pelicans to be so
Mhm.
far up the ladder either. But don't forget about Memphis. You cannot
Yeah,
forget
yeah.
about Dallas with Luka Doncic. It feels like he can do
Mhm.
anything anytime he wants. But also Denver with Jokic. I
Oh,
mean, he's a
wow.
two-time reigning MVP for a reason. And even though they're slipping right now, I would say don't count out Kawhi Leonard and the Los Angeles Clippers, because with a healthy Kawhi Leonard and a healthy Paul George, they can make a deep run. And I know they're rumored to be looking at Mike Conley right now of
Yeah.
the Utah Jazz. So a recent injury to John Wall has them looking toward Mike Conley, but NBA trade deadline's coming up soon. I know
Mhm,
the Celtics and Raptors are both interested in Jakob Poeltl from
mhm.
the San Antonio Spurs. And I think the Raptors could possibly make a big push. They're looking at Poeltl. They're looking at DeAndre Ayton and possibly Miles Turner as well. So I do think there'll be quite a few moves made, and we're possibly talking about the Chicago Bulls blowing it up. A
Mm,
team that's got good names, but hasn't had as great of success this season as they would hope. They're talking about
true.
possibly moving on from Levine, possibly moving
Mhm.
on from DeRozan. And if you
Yeah.
move on from Levine and DeRozan, you might as well move on from Vucevic. You might as well move on from Lonzo Ball. And,
Mhm.
a guy who's been getting more interest than you would think around this trade deadline is Alex Caruso, being,
Yeah.
a
Mhm.
great defensive guard as well. So there's a lot of players that can be moved. There's a lot of players that are
Mhm.
going to be moved. I know the Wizards have said today, or I read in reports today, that they'd like to move on from Rui Hachimura, but
Mhm.
could possibly move on from Kyle Kuzma as well for a team that's looking to add him. He's had the best season of his career so far. Detroit's another team looking to sell. They signed Bojan Bogdanovic knowing that they were going to trade him at the
Mhm.
deadline. They
Yeah.
want at least a first rounder for him. OG Anunoby from Toronto is also getting some trade interest. So there's a whole lot of moves to be made.
Mhm.
We'll definitely see what happens in that regard.
I'm really looking forward to seeing how, things kind of get interesting towards All-Star weekend. But 3 points of order I was just looking at the standings the other day. I know we were just kind of running down those teams. What amazes me so much, and I understand as I kind of mentioned, like in um, college football, and certainly the way that the NFL is right now, just kind of like with all the power shifts, whether it's seeing Nick Saban kind of finally struggle at Alabama, the SEC kind of now becoming Georgia's team. Certainly, we'll see a power shift in the Pac-12 in a few years with USC and UCLA leaving as well, and kind of just briefly going to the NFL as well. Just seeing the rise of all the young quarterbacks in the AFC, just kind of taking over that conference. But my comparison here to the NBA, seeing how Denver and seeing how Memphis and even seeing as well, of course, with your Celtics as well, just kind of taking over the Eastern Conference. I would love more than anything to see, who's going to really emerge as, seeing if, because, as you mentioned about Tampa Bay having their mini dynasty, certainly the Golden State Warriors had their mid dynasty in the middle of the 2010s and 2020s. I just love seeing how Morant has looked for Memphis going with my Knicks. If Knicks had him at number two, he would have been a incredible player if they landed him. But seeing him and seeing Denver go at it, I'm like, I just love to see probably someone different than Golden State, probably West represent the Western Conference because Denver didn't miss the NBA Finals by much when they lost to the Lakers, I think 2 years ago when they were in the COVID bubble. So I really like the way that Michael Malone has put that team together, and certainly Memphis has a really balanced team behind Morant right now. But I'm just kind of saying, let there kind of be a power shift in the NBA and just kind of let's see, kind of what happens here, either at the trade deadline or kind of see how the playoffs play out in a couple of months.
Certainly, and out of all those teams that you mentioned that have been playing great, Memphis has to be the most impressive, and the reason
Mhm.
you say that is because of the lack of stars they have. To think to win an NBA championship, you're talking about 3 to 4 stars. Well, the Grizzlies are one of the best team in the West with 1 star, and
Yeah,
even though I say 1 star, let's not forget about the impact that Desmond Bain has had,
exactly.
who was actually originally picked by the Celtics, but
Yeah.
traded because the Celtics wanted to avoid the tax.
Hmm.
He's turned out to be a great NBA pro. I believe was picked at 52 or 53. He's
Wow.
probably their second best player.
Hmm.
Steven Adams has always been solid, only improving his effort on the offensive end. And then Denver, like you'd mentioned, the only problem with Denver, even though they have a lot of solid pieces around Jokic, is that they can never stay healthy. You know,
Right.
you if you ask me, I think in order to go over the hump, Denver needs a legitimate second star
Yeah.
because the fact of the matter is that they always have to deal with a banged up Jamal Murray or a banged up Michael Porter. It happens to them almost every single season. So if you could give Nikola Jokic, an amazing shooting point guard, perhaps somebody, and I'm not saying that this will happen, but just a name like possibly Damian Lillard. I mean, you're talking about the Denver Nuggets transforming and transcending to one of the greatest teams in basketball for sure.
Mhm. Absolutely. It's going to be unique to kind of see, with all the trade partners, as you were mentioning a little while ago, kind of seeing, who plays chess and who plays mate to see what happens as the trade deadline nears a little bit closer. But um, probably what I was going to go ahead and do is I'm probably just going to go ahead and wrap this up here tonight. We're about an hour and 3 minutes in, but I'll let you have the last word before I cut us off for our broadcast here tonight.
Yeah, I appreciate that, and I appreciate you having me on. Not really much anything to say
Mhm.
uh, in regards to sports, but just me personally being happy to be here. And I look forward to talking more sports. I, we barely scratched the surface on what's
Mhm.
going on with baseball.
Yeah.
Barely scratched the surface on really the NHL or European soccer. So I'm really happy to have been on, and I'm really happy to see where things go with this podcast from here.
Mhm. Thank you for that last word. And, this will actually close us off here for the night here. But we'd like to thank everybody for joining us here on episode 3 of our All Pro Sports podcast. I will have another episode planned tomorrow with some of our other co-hosts that we had from last year. But just nice to see Mack Baltes as joining our new group here on our All Pro Sports podcast, and hopefully we will have him back on hopefully in the next week or so. But this is Alex Christ and Mack Baltes signing off here on episode 3 of the All Pro Sports podcast, and we hope everybody has a good night. Have a good night, everybody.